What if your intelligence was never the thing holding you back? Maybe you've had this moment. You're watching someone solve a problem that seems effortless, and a quiet thought slips into your mind. They're just smarter than me. You don't argue with it, you just accept it. Because somewhere along the way, someone convinced all of us that intelligence is something you're given, not something you build. That if your IQ wasn't high enough by the time you became an adult, the story was already written. But what if that's the biggest lie you've quietly carried for years? Because history keeps whispering the opposite. Albert Einstein wasn't the child everyone expected to change physics. Teachers doubted him. Some thought he simply wasn't gifted. Charles Darwin struggled through school, bored by memorization that everyone else seemed willing to accept. Thomas Edison was told he couldn't be taught at all. None of them looked like the people history remembers. So, what changed? Not their DNA. Not some magical moment where they suddenly became geniuses. Something much quieter happened. They changed the way they used their minds, long before science understood what was happening inside the brain. And maybe that's where your story begins too. Think about the last time you were completely alone. No phone. No music. No notifications. Just your own thoughts. It probably didn't last very long. Because silence feels strange now, almost uncomfortable. Within seconds, your hand reaches for something. Anything. Another video. Another message. Another distraction. It feels harmless. But here's what's happening underneath. Your brain never gets the chance to wrestle with itself. It never wanders far enough to discover something new. Einstein understood this instinctively. He wasn't constantly searching for answers. Sometimes he'd simply walk, hour after hour, asking impossible questions that had no textbook waiting to rescue him. What would happen if I could chase a beam of light? No experiments. No equations. Just imagination refusing to stay inside familiar walls. Today, neuroscience finally has a name for what he was doing. When your mind is left alone long enough, it begins connecting ideas you didn't know belonged together. The insight doesn't arrive immediately. First comes boredom. Then restlessness. Then something interesting happens. A thought appears that wasn't there before. You've probably felt it. The solution that suddenly arrives in the shower. The answer that appears halfway through a quiet walk. It almost feels like your brain was working while you weren't paying attention. Because it was. Sometimes, doing nothing is exactly when your mind is doing its deepest work. Now think about something else. That moment when you're stuck. You've been trying for 5 minutes, maybe 10. Nothing makes sense. Your finger starts moving toward the search bar. I'll just look it up. We've all done it. And every time, the discomfort disappears. But so does something else. The chance for your brain to become stronger. Benjamin Franklin had a strange habit. He would read something brilliant, close the book, and force himself to recreate it entirely from memory. Not because it was easier. Because it wasn't. It was frustrating. Slow. Messy. He failed constantly. But every mistake forced his brain to build connections it never would have created if someone had simply handed him the answer. Maybe you've mistaken struggle for proof that you're not intelligent. What if it's actually proof that your brain is changing? The hardest part of learning isn't getting the answer. It's staying with the question long enough that your mind changes before the answer arrives. Leonardo da Vinci didn't keep neat notebooks. They weren't journals. They weren't diaries. They looked almost unfinished. Questions. Sketches. Half-written ideas. Arguments with himself. Contradictions. Imagine opening someone's mind and seeing thoughts scattered across the page before they became clear. That's what he was doing. He wasn't writing because he already understood. He was writing to discover what he actually believed. You know that strange feeling when you think you understand something, until someone asks you to explain it, and suddenly, everything falls apart. Writing exposes those invisible cracks, not to embarrass you, to show you exactly where real understanding begins. Instead of asking, "What happened today?" try asking, "What am I pretending to understand?" That question alone can change the way you think. Here's something most people never notice. Highly intelligent people don't just collect information. They collect lenses. One idea from psychology, another from biology, a principle from physics, a lesson from economics. Individually, they seem unrelated. But slowly, they begin connecting, like pieces of a map that suddenly reveal a hidden route. Charlie Munger called this a latticework of mental models. History's greatest thinkers kept wandering into unfamiliar territory, not because they wanted more information, because every new perspective made the old ones more powerful. Eventually, your brain stops seeing isolated facts. It starts seeing patterns. And patterns are where breakthroughs live. Now imagine closing the book, closing your laptop, putting your notes away. Could you still explain what you learned? Without looking, most of us can't, because recognition feels almost identical to remembering. Until the notes disappear, Nikola Tesla could build entire machines inside his imagination, rotate every piece, test every movement, notice flaws, before anything existed in the real world. It sounds almost impossible, but memory has never been about storing more. It's about rebuilding ideas until they become part of how you think. Before you review, try remembering. Before you reread, try teaching. Your brain grows stronger every time it reaches into the dark and pulls knowledge back on its own. There's one final habit, and it's probably the one modern life steals from us most often. Rest. Not scrolling. Not binge-watching. Real recovery. Charles Darwin rarely worked endlessly. A few hours of deep thinking, then walking, reflecting, stopping. We celebrate people who look exhausted, who brag about sleeping less, who wear burnout like a medal. But your brain doesn't become sharper because you push it without mercy. It becomes sharper because you give it space to rebuild. Sleep. Movement, sunlight, silence, even boredom, especially boredom, the moments that feel unproductive, are often the moments your brain quietly prepares for its next leap. So maybe intelligence was never a fixed number waiting to define your life. Maybe it was always a living system, something shaped, one habit, one thought, one uncomfortable moment at a time. The people we call geniuses didn't wake up different. They protected curiosity, they welcomed struggle, they thought deeply, they wrote honestly. They connected ideas, they remembered deliberately, and they respected the limits of the human mind instead of trying to outrun them. Maybe the question isn't, how intelligent am I? Maybe the real question is, what kind of mind am I building every single day? Because if that's the question, your story is still being written. There are ideas that entertain you, and ideas that quietly change the way you think. If you're here for the second kind, subscribe.